Hey guys, so in this little video, I'm going to talk briefly about an introduction for cellular communication. Not going to go into much detail, just covering really the overview and the types of cellular communication. So it's important to start off with the fact that all cellular communication at its heart is chemical in nature. Basically, we just have cells passing chemicals from one cell to the next in order to trigger some kind of response. And so we have our initial cell who will be sending the signal, and we have our cell who will be receiving the signal. Whatever the chemical is that is being transferred from one cell to the next to parlay that communication mechanism, right, to send that message, we're calling it a ligand or a ligand. Okay? Doesn't matter what type of chemical it is. In this case, it is a ligand. As long as it's sending the message, it's a ligand. Okay? The whole process for all of cellular communication, regardless of what style we're talking about, has 3 steps. The first step is the reception. So that cell on the receiving end has to engage with the ligand. The ligand is outside of that cell, and it needs to convey the message into the cell. And so the reception typically occurs with a protein that is embedded in the membrane of the receiving cell. That ligand will engage with that protein, and it will alter that protein in some way that will trigger the next step. And now, a lot of times, that's a very simple mechanism where by engaging with the ligand, the protein is simply changing shape and releasing some secondary molecule that it was holding on to on the interior side of the membrane. And so outside receptor, ligand comes along, clicks in, right? Changes the shape of the protein along the way. The interior side of the protein was hanging on to a secondary molecule. When it changes shape, it lets go of that molecule. That molecule is now free to float around the cytoplasm and do stuff. Alternatively, this might be an enzymatic protein, and the active sites are not engageable until the ligand is present, or vice versa. The ligand might turn off that enzyme, right? That's another way that this can operate. Either way, the heart of the story is that the ligand engages with this protein and causes the second step. The second step of the process is called transduction. And so once the cell receives that signal, okay, there is going to be a secondary cascade of effects that occur within the cell. And so if it sticks with that simple version that I was talking about before, where this secondary messenger molecule is released, okay, it goes out and it engages in some kind of chemical reaction, okay, triggering subsequent effects. Right? So I might have a chemical reaction where if this is molecule A, it might go engage with molecule B, and you get molecule Q. Okay? Molecule Q, in turn, can make molecules T, S, and V. And perhaps you need T, S, and V to trigger the response. Right? The point is that it's not just a direct shot from the reception to the response. There's this middleman of activity going on. And that's the transduction. And then finally, once the transduction is complete, we have the actual response. Whatever the signal was intended to trigger in the cell, it is triggered. Here in my narrative, I've made my ST and V, right, trigger a genetic expression of a red protein. So this cell turned red. Right? And so theoretically, in this narrative, cell A sent a message to cell B that said, hey buddy, turn red. Message was received, message was passed along through transduction, and ultimately the response turns the cell red. Communication success. Okay. The types of communication. First is autocrine, auto meaning self. Right? So in an autocrine response, the cell is literally sending a message to itself. It takes the ligand, spits it out, the ligand travels up to its own receptor, triggers a transduction, triggers a response. It's excessive, but it's how evolution made it happen, right? It is what it is. So autocrine, cells sending a message to itself. Cool. Paracrine is the type I usually think about. It's usually the type I utilize as examples when I talk about cellular communication. It is when two cells are near each other. Right? They're either in the same tissue or they're floating around in the interstitial fluid near each other. Right? They're next to each other. They're close by. Cell A sends the ligand over to cell B. They get the message, job achieved. Well, so they are near each other. They're close to one another. Paracrine. Para, around. Right? Along. Then we have juxtacrine. Okay? And juxtacrine is when the cells are physically abutting one another. Okay? They're touching. Okay? A lot of the time, they're touching so much that they share a protein channel. Right? They're actually linked via an open channel. Right? And so in the membrane, there's a protein channel that's engaged with both of these. Half of it's on one side, half of it's on the other. This makes for a very, very quick communication between the two cells. Right? So cell A just dumps chemicals directly into cell B. Ta-da, boom. Right? Juxtacrine. Cells are physically touching each other, very often actually linked via channels. And the last is endocrine. Right? Boop. So endocrine is for when the cells are very, very far apart within the body. Right? Typically used by glands, right, to communicate. And so like the message could be coming from my pineal gland and have to reach my pancreas. Why not? Right? And so that's a far trip to make. The endocrine mechanism is specifically when the ligand has to enter the bloodstream to make its trip. Right? The lymphatic system as well is also possible. But more often than not, we're talking about moving through the blood. Right? And so cell A is releasing the ligand into the bloodstream. Going to be wrapped up in a vessel, was packaged by the Golgi apparatus, right? And dumped out into the blood. That ligand is going to have a special wrapping that dictates what kind of cell can absorb it. Right? And when it bumps into the right cell type that has the appropriate receptors for this ligand, right, it will take it in and it will do cell communication. Okay. So endocrine specifically for cells that are far apart from one another. Cool? And so that is the entirety of our introduction to cellular communication. It's just important to know the 3 steps. We have reception, we have transduction, we have response, and the 4 types. We have autocrine, we have paracrine, we have juxtacrine, and we have endocrine, all working the same way. And we will look at each of these types in more detail. We'll look at some specific examples, what kind of cells use what kind of communication. And yeah, that's it. Cool. Bye.